policy that my federal government says is okay for me. It has a lot of things I don't need, and my rates double. The problem is that this government has not, no government has proven they can manage this big a part of our economy. If you look at how good a job they're doing with the Veterans Administration, then it might give you some indication of what this is going to look like in a few years. In my opinion, it needs to be repealed and replaced. And we have a good alternative out there. There are several, but the one I personally like the best is Congressman Price's own H.R. 2300. It deals with affordability, transportability, insurability, and it doesn't deny access the way this one does. I just don't believe that the bureaucrats in Washington getting between patients and doctors, between doctors and insurance companies, and between insurance companies and patients is a better way to go than the free market solution.
Brief follow-up to both of you. What about the problem of Georgia's rural hospitals that are closing because the federal subsidies are not coming, largely because Georgia did not extend Medicaid?
Well, it's largely coming because of Obamacare. They cut the rates. So my view is that we need to give more power, I think, to the states to deal with and have more flexibility to deal with the priorities that they have in these rural and smaller hospitals that have a disproportionate share of Medicaid and Medicare patients. I personally think that the Medicaid payments to the state should come back in the form of block grants. So that gives the governor and the legislature more flexibility to deal with these needs in the rural communities.
I know you've been vocal on this issue as well. What's your solution to these Georgia rural hospitals going out of business?
I've been talking to folks that run rural hospitals and that are partners to rural hospitals around the state, and the first thing they tell me is that we should have expanded Medicaid as a state, that we are not allowing 650,000 people that could have access to health insurance. We're paying their emergency bills and we're sending the dollars elsewhere. But we haven't done that, so we need to be pragmatic. We need to repeal the cuts that are threatening these rural hospitals. We need to work together to do that. We can't afford to have gridlock. We need to actually fix what's not working and not have a stalemate while folks in rural communities suffer from the continued closure of these hospitals.
Thank you. Let's move to transportation. As you know, Georgia gets about half of its road building funds from the Federal Highway Trust Fund, which is running on empty. It's depleted. The gas tax is the basis for the Highway Trust Fund. It hasn't been raised since 1993. And to compound the problem with it not keeping up with inflation, you have Americans driving less and driving more fuel-efficient cars, which means less gas purchase, that's less revenue for the Highway Trust Fund. But if Georgia loses those federal funds, it would be a big blow. Road projects would come to a halt. You've said you will not raise taxes under any circumstances, Mr. Perdue, but what's the alternative to raising the gas tax to keep those federal funds flowing to Georgia?
John, thank you. This is a perfect example of what happens when big government tries to allocate our resources out here. This is a much bigger issue. It's not just the roads. It's our entire infrastructure. We're spending a fraction of what we need to be spending in our infrastructure just to maintain it, not necessarily to improve it so we can be competitive with other countries around the world. If you look at the Port of Savannah as one example, it's taken us 17 years to get approval through the EPA and our legal system to deepen that port 5 feet. 5 feet. In the meantime, China's added one of their major ports in the last 3 or 4 years. We're losing our competitive edge because we're not paying attention to our infrastructure. It's one of the 5 basic precepts of economic development: regulatory control, educated workforce, water, cheap power, and infrastructure. That's how you grow an economy. The problem right now in every one of those areas, we've got difficulties. In this specific case, we have hope. There's $480 billion of redundant agency expenses in our federal budget. I said that right, $480 billion of redundant agencies. We don't have a problem not having enough money. We have a problem of this not going to the right purposes. Investment in infrastructure, our roads, our ports, our airports, our rail, absolutely have economic return for our economy. That's where that money needs to be spent, not in redundant agencies.
No vote for a gas tax hike?
No, sir.
Same question to you, Ms. Nunn. Would you vote for a hike in the gas tax, which hasn't been raised since 1993, to keep federal trust fund dollars coming to Georgia?
I do not believe that we should be raising taxes either. I also share David's sensibility about the importance of infrastructure. I think we have to find ways of investing in our infrastructure. We have a D+ grade from our civil engineers. China's spending 3 times what America need to have a long-term view around this. And I think, again, what it takes is statesmen who are going to work across the aisle, people who are going to embrace partnership in getting things done. I think the Savannah port and the deepening of the harbor is a perfect example of this. It did take almost 17 years to get that done. And I think the example and I think the real illustration of why we need to change that is that, we have too many people who are not willing to work together to get the kinds of things done that we all know are practical and need to happen. So, unlike David, though, I don't believe that you can prosecute your way to a court. I think you have to be able to work with the president. You have to work together across the aisle in Congress in order to get it done. And that's what we need more of in Washington, and I do think that is essential to creating the conditions for economic growth.
I really have to follow up for both of you because the Highway Trust Fund is empty. It has to be funded. In fact, there's a bipartisan move in the Senate to do that. So this talk is wonderful, but the road building projects are online. The bulldozers are ready to go. They need the money. What do you do in the short term to keep the money flowing?
I do think that there are purposeful choices that we need to make about how we invest. We know that investment in infrastructure, investment in education creates returns and enables growth. And it's actually the way that we do enable more funds to have the capacity for feeding the things that we need to get done. So I think it is about, we do have duplication in government. We do have to make choices. And I would make the choice to invest in our infrastructure as a part of a strategic outline, working together with others in Congress.
Well, briefly, what do you do if the funds run dry and the bulldozers can't?
They're already dry, John, but that's, we have that in so many areas in our country today. I mean, we have ways and means right now in the Congress between the House and the Senate to actually take care of that. But they've got to reallocate, reprioritize how that money gets spent. That's what we send them up there to do. Just to add a new gas tax here is the easy way out. That would be an easy answer. But we have an $18 trillion debt, John. And more than that, we have another $86 trillion of things that we're not even talking about yet. And here we are going to add another tax on the back of small businesses and individuals. There's a better way to do this if the people in Congress would get together and just get it done.
Thanks very much. Next topic area is immigration. As you know, the Immigration Reform Act passed the Senate in bipartisan fashion, never came to a vote in the House because of conservative Republican opposition. You have indicated you favor that bipartisan bill in the Senate, but President Obama, in the next few weeks, is going, we are told, to make an executive action announcement. We don't know what he's going to say, but there's considerable speculation that he may attempt to find ways to make it easier for the 11 million, maybe not all 11 million, but some of those illegal immigrants in this country to gain legal status. My question to you, Michelle Nunn, is do you think the president, in absence of congressional action, should take action, and what would you like to have him say?
Well, let me start by saying that I do support the bipartisan comprehensive legislation that was really worked very hard towards by folks like the Chamber and unions and Farm Bureau and folks as diverse as Chuck Schumer and Marco Rubio. So when all those people agree, I think it's something that you need to take a real look at. And this is, I think, probably one of the sharper contrasts that you'll find between David and myself. I think David embraces what I believe is the attitude of gridlock in Washington that has not enabled us to get this done. We talk about what's happening on the border. The immigration bill that was passed in the Senate would have enabled us to invest in 20,000 security agents on the border and a surveillance system that would have made a real difference already. So, when you look at what David has said about this, not only did he oppose this, but he actually ran ads distorting the position of the chamber, the compromise position that many folks in this room worked towards creating. And I don't think that that's what we need. David also sat in a room with the folks at the chamber and said, after 10 minutes, that he walked out in anger. He said that. And so, this is the kind of issue that we need to be able to stay at the table, to work out, to actually make a difference around. and really address our economy, jobs, and the deficit. All of the economists that I've read and talked to say this is the right thing to do for our country, and we need to move forward with it. But I do believe that we need to have Congress and the President work together. We need to get out of the executive order business and into the compromising collaboration and partnership business in Washington.
Do I read that to say you would prefer President Obama not to call an executive action?
Yeah, I believe that, again, we should have Congress making the kinds of compromises and partnership with the executive branch that will enable us to do this legislatively and not executively.
Thank you very much. You said we can't really talk about comprehensive immigration reform until we secure the border. But surely you have thought about and have some ideas about what to do about the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country. Many of whom are important to the state's economy, in particular the state's agriculture industry. What do you do about these folks? Do you deport them? What's your solution? And also, I'd like to get your comments on the expected executive action by the President.
Well, I think the fact that implied amnesty is on the table is one reason why we have the debacle on our border today. I mean, this has been this president's position all along. I disagree with that. I think the first thing that we have to do is break this complex issue into its components. It's what you do every day in business. And the first component that we have got to solve is, are we going to follow the law of the land? Are we going to enforce the laws that we already have on the books? And that's to protect our borders and secure our borders. I frankly think it's more than an immigration issue, it's a national security issue. You know, today, the immigration issue, though, is broader than just illegal immigrants. 40% of the people that are here illegally came in on a legal visa. They just overstayed the visa. So this federal government, our bureaucracy, is not even enforcing the visa laws that we have. In addition, if you look at the legal immigration problem, it may be as big or bigger than the illegal problem. And that is that we're bringing in twice as many legal immigrants today as we did during the two highest periods of our history, 1880 to 1920, and then again in the 80s. And this has not been a bipartisan, go along, get along kind of thing. This is not Congress hasn't weighed in. This is this president with executive orders doing this. I really believe that we've got to take a comprehensive look at this because there are needs. Having grown up in Warner Robins and worked on farms, I understand the needs of farmers to get access to legal labor. And right now, the H-2A program is built by bureaucrats for bureaucrats, and it's very cumbersome for these farmers. And I believe that it needs to be streamlined, more control put back in the states so they can have access to legal labor.
Next general area of inquiry is defense. Military bases in Georgia are very important to the state's economy. We know we lost Fort Dillon and Fort McPherson and the Naval Supply School in Athens, and the last BRAC, the Base Realignment and Closure Commission. That was back in '05, and there's word that there may be another BRAC coming up in the next couple of years, which raises the question, could Dobbins Air Reserve Base be on the line? Could Dobbins Air Force Base be on the line? My question to each of you, really, and I'll start with you, David Perdue. As a freshman senator, what can you do to protect Georgia's military bases and be sure that the cuts in defense, which are coming, don't endanger the national security?
Well, I grew up in Warner Robins Air Force Base, just down the road. If you listen quietly as we leave here, you may hear a few planes going off. But as I was growing up, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was riding a bicycle at football practice and listening and watching about every 4 or 5 minutes, a KC-135 tanker or a B-52 took off, going to do their racetrack route around Cuba. And as a young kid, I thought, man, oh man, how important it is to have that kind of security. Of course, that was a time when they had the nuclear bomb threat training thing in our schools where, you know, we've all been there. You get under your desk, right? But in all seriousness, I believe that the greatest threat to our national security and to our defense is this debt and the fact that we're not taking it seriously. If you look at what we're trying to do around the world right now, we've confused our allies and encouraged our enemies because of this confused foreign policy that we have. To have a strong foreign policy, you have to have a strong defense. But to have a strong defense, as we proved with the Soviet Union in the 1980s, you have to have a strong economy, and you can't be borrowing at the level that we're borrowing right now internationally and do that. I believe that if another BRAC round comes, that this state, and being a freshman senator, I'll be fighting to grow the economy to help make sure that we have a strong defense. But I'll work with these private organizations like 21st Century and the Chambers of Commerce around the state to make sure that we communicate the strategic intent of these bases and also the strategic importance of our geographic location. These bases are not here by mistake, and I intend to keep them here. Thank you.
Michelle Nunn, as you know, Georgia has long historically been somewhat protected from military cutbacks. Back in the day when Walter George, Richard Russell, even your dad, Sam Nunn, not to mention your great uncle Carl Vinson, they were all part of the establishment that kept bases secure here, but those days are gone. So the same question to you: how do you, as a freshman senator, protect the military bases in Georgia, which are of great importance to local communities economically, and be sure that defense cuts, when they come, do not endanger the national security at a time of such world peril?
Well, I have been able to travel around and meet with base communities and folks that are doing such a good job, 21st Century Partnership here at Robbins. And, you know, we have such a proud heritage of support for our military here in Georgia. With our 9 bases, 140,000 men and women that serve under DOD, $20 billion worth of economic impact here in our state, second highest enlistment rate of any state in the country in our military. And so the first thing I would say is that I disagree with those in Washington and the president who believe that this is the time to cut our military. I don't believe that. I believe that the world is a dangerous place right now. We have asked our men and women to sacrifice enormously over the last decade plus, and we need to continue to have the strongest and best military in the world. We have a wonderful heritage of bipartisan leadership here in Georgia. I've heard my dad say on a number of occasions, he says not to brag, but there was never a brat closure during his 24 years in the Senate. And that's not a coincidence. I think that we need someone who is going to commit to being a steward on the Armed Services Committee, and I have committed to do that. I think we need someone who is going to really work to preserve and protect those bases, but also to help expand their missions. I was at Kings Bay recently, and they have 20% additional capacity there. We need to be bringing the capacity to continue to contribute to our military here to Georgia. I do think that gridlock is the enemy of our capacity here. And if you look at sequestration, for instance, I was talking to a Major General in the Marines. He said that sequestration has done more to hurt our military readiness than anything he can think of over the last number of decades. The government shutdown, which David said that he was for, furloughed 4,000 folks just down the road here at Robbins. So we need to work together to preserve and protect our military bases and, in a broader sense, our military capacity as a nation.
Any rebuttal on the support of the shutdown?
No, not at all. I think that speaks for itself. I think it was, you know, the situation that we had in Washington was over Obamacare. What I was saying was that we cannot default on our interest payment. This is one of the things that's just sacrosanct, and I thought we had a lot of people beginning to talk about that.
All right. Well, we have covered the 4 basic topic areas that the candidates agreed to, and I wish we could keep going, but under the rules that we have, the forum is approaching conclusion. It is time now for the closing statements, and by prior agreement, flip of the coin, the order was determined, and Michelle Nunn has the first 2-minute closing statement.
Thank you. Well, first of all, John, thank you. David, thank you. I look forward to more spirited conversations over the next few months, and thanks again to the Chamber for hosting such a terrific gathering. I was here last year with you all. I was just getting my campaign started, and you were honoring Saxby Chambliss, and you were honoring him for a number of achievements, but one of those achievements that was highlighted was his work with Mark Warner, Senator Warner, on the long-term debt. And I think that kind of bipartisanship, that kind of statesmanship, that kind of collaboration is what we need more of in Washington. And it's been the theme of my campaign. As I've traveled around the state, I think it's been responsible for the kind of energy and excitement that we've seen. We had 200 people that were here in the hot sun waiting for us when we got here, just to say we're ready for real change and we're ready for the kind of civility that you want to bring to Washington. And it's responsible for the 50,000 plus folks that have either given their time or their resources to the campaign. And it's at the heart of taking on the issues that we can deal with a practical and pragmatic sensibility. Some of the issues that we've talked about here today: protecting and preserving our national defense, comprehensive immigration reform, and making sure that we're investing in the right things, smart things like infrastructure, and like our kids, like education. And so I believe David and I do have different real-world experiences. I have an experience that's been about lifting people up for the last 26 years, building and growing organizations, and getting things done for the people of Georgia in a collaborative way, in a proven way of working across differences and party lines. I think that's what we need more of. I don't think we need more prosecutors. I think we need more problem solvers. And I think we need more collaboration and less conflict. And that's what I pledge to bring. And I've been telling people all over the state that I'm interested in carrying forward the Georgia motto values: wisdom and justice and moderation. So I invite y'all to join with me in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the closing statement, 2 minutes from David Perdue.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you guys again for hosting us today. You know, our politicians have created a full-blown crisis in America. I think it's going to take somebody from the outside with the right experience to make a difference. I believe in this race we should be talking about the issues and priorities that address that crisis. Americans always do well dealing with crisis. I've been very clear about my priorities throughout this entire campaign. I believe that we've really got to get serious about stopping the devastation of Obamacare. 2, I really think that we've got to get serious about stopping this outrageous spending and rein in our out-of-control expenditures. The 3rd thing is we've got to grow our economy and create jobs. That happens by reforming our tax structure, reducing regulations, and unlocking our energy resources. The 4th thing, yes, we need to secure our borders and create an immigration system that makes sense in a free society that has the rule of law. I just believe that this race is very simple, the decision in this race. If you like what's going on in Washington, then vote for my opponent, because you know she'll be nothing more than a proxy for Harry Reid and Barack Obama, and nothing will change. But if you're as outraged as I am by the size and scope of this government, by the arrogant policies that are failing in this administration, and by the sheer magnitude of the debt they're piling on the backs of our kids and grandkids, then stand with me and let's take our country back. Together we can bring America back to a position of strength and prosperity. Thank you again for having us today. I look forward to future conversations. Thank you very much.
Stimulating exchange of ideas in this forum, and I'm sure this will not be the last time the 2 of you are on stage together as the campaign continues to build momentum heading toward Election Day in November. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your attention. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Clark. I'm president of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you, and would you join me again in thanking John for moderating today, and for Michelle and David for being with us. This Senate race is extremely important. It could determine who controls the United States Senate, but it's not the only race that we're undergoing right now. Every constitutional officer in Georgia has opposition. We have many members of Congress who are facing opposition this year. We have several seats in the House and the Senate here in Georgia that are up for grabs, and of course many, many local races as well. That's why as a business community we have to be involved to make sure